After a long time studying both Japanese and Mandarin, a lot of people ask me which one is more difficult to learn. There's a problem with the question, though. Anyone who's learned multiple languages as an adult knows that it's not that simple. It depends on a lot of things. What other languages you speak, what your personal strengths are, how flexible you are, whether you're a visual or auditory learner, how immersed you are in the language, and what the ultimate goal is of learning the language. Different aspects of a language can be easy or difficult. Japanese pronunciation is really easy. That made it easy for me to open my mouth and start talking right away. But Japanese people are relatively shy, which gave me fewer opportunities to speak when I came to Japan. Can change when people drink, but in general, people are not open to talking to strangers. Mandarin pronunciation has four tones, but more than just that, the romanization called pinyin is not that intuitive for English speakers. On the other hand, Japanese grammar always has been a nightmare for me. There are different levels to politeness, and each level has its own grammar. Because of that, there are so many ways to express the same idea. So I usually find myself lost in my head thinking which level of politeness I should use to talk to people. I have to think, should I say taberu or tabemasu ka? Both mean do you want to eat, but the former is more casual and the latter is more polite. So I'm always thinking about which one to use, and it makes it a lot more demanding to speak the language. Some people always use the polite form with people older than themselves or people who aren't close, but then you end up in this cycle where you never get close to people because you're always being careful of not offending them. Especially now when people are looking to be a little bit more casual, but they're still worried about offending others. So they kind of take cues from whoever wants to speak more, and they take cues from each other. So if you hint to people that you want to be casual, then they tend to be a little bit more casual. So this is one of a few reasons why interactions in Japanese can be awkward. That makes it harder to learn the language too. I find that people in Japan love reading more than a lot of countries. So everyone has a really massive active vocabulary. People might know the same amount of words, but the words that they actually use, I think, in Japan is a lot higher. So if you're trying to read a book or understand television, you're going to need a lot more vocabulary in Japanese than some other languages. This really affects my listening skills because there's a ton of words I don't recognize. I'm trying to improve that now, but it's a lot of words. Reading and writing in Japanese was difficult at first, but once you get used to the characters, I find it easier than Mandarin. The challenging part of Japanese is learning hiragana and katakana, which are more like an alphabet. And then there's kanji, which are characters. And so they mix the three together, and it can be a little tricky at first, but once you get used to it, I find it not too hard. If I have a dictionary, I can read almost anything in Japanese. Also, there's a ton of interesting books and manga, so it makes it exciting to learn. Mandarin, I have an easier time speaking because people are not as reserved and I've had a lot more opportunities to speak. I have a lot of close friends who speak Mandarins. That makes it easy, and people are more direct. They tend to use simpler vocabulary just because it gets the point across a lot easier. I learned Japanese first, so Chinese characters were easier for me. If I learned Chinese, I think Japanese would have been easier for me. About 50% of the characters are basically the same, and then 40% are similar between the two, depending on whether you're learning traditional or simplified. But both aren't that different. Then there's about 10% which are completely different. Messages in Mandarin are usually easier for me because there's that one single writing system. But once you have like essays, that one single writing system becomes really overwhelming, and it's kind of gives me a headache. There's nothing like an alphabet, so it's just characters. It's strange when I'm reading Japanese. If it's short messages, I get tired, but when it's longer writing, I feel less tired. I think reading long bouts of text in Chinese has been more difficult for me because I didn't learn in a formal environment. I basically taught myself through conversation. And so most of what I learned was conversational. It's a lot less reading and writing than I would have done in school. I mean, I learned Japanese like that too, but I think I spent a lot more time with books when I learned Japanese. So books are easier. And that's generally how it goes. Whatever it is you spend time learning, that's what you're going to have an easier time using or interacting with in daily life. If you handed me a contract in Japanese, I'd get nervous, but I could read it at the end of the day. But if you hand me a contract in Chinese, I'll probably just ask for an English translation because I don't think I'll be able to understand it. A lot of that formal vocabulary I just never learned, and I never really had an opportunity to learn. And so I didn't go out of my way to learn it. In Mandarin, people use a lot more idioms. Japanese has a lot of idioms, but I don't hear them in daily life, and I hear them less in media. So that makes reading and listening, watching media in Mandarin a bit more difficult than Japanese. As for the tones, a lot of people find them challenging at first, but after you learn to distinguish them, I think they're not as hard as people make them out to be. But I learned through imitation mostly, so I learned the basic tones and how to write them and how to read them at first. But as soon as I figured out the difference between them, I just imitated people, and that led to me having a pretty decent accent, but I don't always know which tone I'm using, and so I forget tones pretty easily. I might use the wrong tone when I say a word by itself, but if I say it in a sentence, I tend to get it right. In Japanese, sometimes my meaning's misunderstood, but my words are almost never misunderstood. In Mandarin, sometimes people really don't understand what I'm saying, and so it could be a little bit more difficult to get the point across. So in general, I've had an easier time speaking in Japanese, but an easier time understanding in Mandarin. Chinese has a lot of dialects and accents, so not even considering Cantonese or Hakka or other like they're basically languages. You can't understand each other when you're speaking those. People who speak those can't understand Mandarin speakers if they don't learn Mandarin. But then there's dialects like Wuhan or Chengdu where they speak a very different version of the same language. They can understand each other, but it's challenging. So you talk to some people and they speak with very different accents. And I learned in the South because I like the accent there. So it's harder for me to understand people from the North. The South is usually a bit more gentle and soft, I think, although it depends on the person. So the Dongbei accent can be a little bit tricky for me, even though basically I understand what they're saying, but it's harder to focus because I'm just not used to the accent. The main thing that makes Mandarin easier for me is that my goals have always been different. With Japanese, there was a lot of media that I was interested in. It meant that I wanted to learn how to read and to understand movies and anime and film and TV, even newspaper articles. With Mandarin, it was always more about making friends and talking to people. I'd love to make friends in both languages, but for someone who wants to study Taoism or Buddhism in Chinese, it's going to be way harder than it was for me to learn Chinese because the goals are different. I have always been interested in those things, but I didn't care about learning them in Chinese, so I learn about those things in English mostly. Speaking in Japanese is easier for me just because I've spent more time with it overall. Listening in Mandarin is easier because I spent a lot more time having casual conversation. In Japanese, there's always been more distance with people, and so it wasn't as great practice, I think. Also, I have to mention that I stopped speaking Japanese for 6 years and I lost about 30 to 40% of my vocabulary and my listening got a lot worse. But with Mandarin, I've never had to stop speaking it because you can find speakers anywhere. So, yeah, in the end, I think Mandarin was easier, but I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case for everyone. A Korean speaker will definitely find Japanese easier. The grammar is almost identical. So, because of my goals, I think Mandarin was a lot easier. If I had had different goals, I think I would consider a lot more difficult. Also, the fact that I understood the characters beforehand. If someone is learning Japanese just to have casual conversation with people, to talk to strangers they meet while they're traveling or to understand basic things, then I think it's not necessarily more difficult. Although the different levels of politeness can definitely be tricky. If they're not interested in learning how to read and write, then I think Japanese could potentially be easier. Depends on the level that they want to be able to read and write in. Yeah, so it really depends on you.